All right, welcome everyone. We are so excited to have you all joining us tonight.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all for joining us to a first ever live stream. My name is Sandra, and we're very happy to present you Game for Thought.
So, my name is Ali Weiss. Just like Sandra, I am a community manager at Digital Arts and Entertainment. So, this is HOES, Hoka School's School for Digital Arts and Entertainment. Basically, what we are launching now is a new live stream series called Game for Thought. So the purpose of this series, and it's been something that students have asked for, a lot of people in the industry. Also, we've been looking at the fact that the industry is so technical. Sometimes it can be easy to overlook these social, ethical topics that are so relevant and so impactful in the real world. So that is basically the idea of this Game for Thought stream is we are going to look at the impacts and implications of industry developments in the actual gaming industry, in the real world. So tonight's theme is going to be sex and violence in games. I just want to give a few thank yous before we go ahead, and I'll pass it back over to Sandra. She'll go over the schedule for tonight's stream. So, just a few thank yous. First of all, thank you to the students that have been asking for these things, and they have been really passionate and interested about these real world topics that implicate the gaming industry and vice versa. So thank you to those who also submitted questions. Very grateful for you guys. Thank you as well to the colleagues that helped us put this together. Our very first Game for Thought stream. Very exciting. Thank you to Sandra, who you see on the screen currently. Thank you as well to Carlos Taipeporas. He is a community manager here at DIE as well. Thank you to Catalina Hansens, who has also been helping us out with this process. Thank you to Alexander DeWepa. He has been our sound guy throughout this entire process, so thank you for that. This is also a collaboration with Quindo. So Quindo is a local radio station here in Kortrijk, and so we would definitely like to give a big thank you to Bros Claerhout. So thank you, thank you, thank you. One last thing, thank you to our Master Chief is what we call him. He is the director of all things DIE. Rick, thank you very much for allowing this to happen and for allowing us to chat about these topics. Without further ado, I will pass it over to Sandra. Before I do that, thank you obviously to our wonderful colleagues and students who are participating in tonight's stream. We would not be able to do this without you, so thank you for that. And now I will pass it over to Sandra, who will go over the schedule for tonight's stream.
Thank you, Ali, and thank you to everyone that Ali mentioned. We really, it means a lot to us that you help us with this, and I hope you enjoyed this live stream tonight. So, to describe you how the stream will go, most time will be dedicated towards the panel. So, after the introduction, we will hear from our guest speaker, who Ali already mentioned, Dr. Lode Lauwert. He is a professor of philosophy at KU Leuven, speaking on the foundation of violence. So that will be around 20 minutes to half an hour, which afterwards we will have our panel, which will include Dr. Laura, Robin Rodette, our major coordinator of visual effects here in DIE and lecturer, and our three game graphics students, Katrina, Joao, and Steven, and Sarah, our moderator for tonight. After the panel, we will move to our audience Q&A. And how will that work? The panel will be discussed with pre-submitted questions from students, and we will have an audience Q&A, and that is for everyone in the Twitch chat. So feel free to send as many questions as you would like. We will go through them, we will moderate them, and we will send them to Sarah to go over them. So please send as many interesting questions as you can think of. For future Game for Thought events, I want to mention a small overview what will happen with this stream. Hopefully you will come back for in future editions. So the next one will be on December 17th with the topic of discrimination and representation in games. So race, gender, sexuality. afterwards, in the next following year, hopefully a more better year, 2021, woohoo, let's go for it. In February 18th is games and addiction, the topic of the talk. March 18th will be ethics, AI, and progress in technology. And on April 22nd will be a last one for this academic year in the IE on the topic of the social dilemma. So everything social media and privacy. So we hope to see you through all of those live streams that we will have. And I hope you have fun tonight. Back to Ali.
So, like I said a little bit earlier, super excited to have you all, whether you are from HOS, DIE, from inside Belgium, outside Belgium, wherever you find yourself in the world. We just think it's important, whether or not you're even in the gaming industry, even if you just think this is interesting. It's easy to, again, overlook these really relevant topics and topics that we'll be confronted with in the real world. So especially for our students that are entering the industry rather shortly for some of them. So again, thank you for joining. I will ask if we can just open up a space for nuanced, mature discussions. We encourage you during this session and even in future sessions as well to open up a space to challenge each other if you want. That's really the whole point of this, right? Is to have discourse about these topics. So in the chat, we encourage you to respectfully challenge each other, challenge some of the thoughts that you are hearing, and just have fun. Enjoy. We really hope that you enjoy the lectures. That's going to happen very shortly. And we hope that you also are prompted to submit some questions because we'd love to see them. So without further ado, I will hand it over to our wonderful guest speaker for the evening. His name is Dr. Loda Lauwert from KU Leuven. So Loda, if you would like to take it away, that would be wonderful.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Lode. I'm a visiting professor at the University of Leuven. Most of the time teaching philosophy of and ethics of AI and technology. In a previous life, I also did research, and I recently figured out that there's also a video game on Marquis de Sade. I did some research on Marquis de Sade, but also on violence. So my topic for tonight, for this short presentation, is about violence, and more precisely about the essence of violence. At least that's the title of my presentation. Let me briefly start with a small introduction. You see here two pictures. First picture is gold. Second one, those not familiar with the Belgian national soccer team. Belgian soccer team, a couple of years ago, blue shirt. And there is a similarity between those two pictures. So the first one is a gold. And there's something special about gold, namely that all the gold atoms in gold do have 79 protons. So every gold atom does have 79 protons. And not only this is the case, it's also the case that only those gold atoms do have 79 protons. At the formal level, not of course at the level of the content, but at the formal level, the same is the case with those soccer players. They all wear this very specific blue shirt. They all wear it. Not only that is the case, only those players have this blue soccer t-shirts from the Belgian national team. So that there is a formal similarity between those two pictures, namely that they do have an essence. And what is the meaning of the term essence? Well, the essence is a property that belongs to all the members of a set and only to those members. You have it here. If I go back to the protons, all gold atoms do have 79 protons, and only those gold atoms do have this amount of protons. Same goes for the Belgian blue t-shirt. Yeah. This was what is called an essence of, doesn't really matter what name you give to it, but at least here I refer to the idea that there is a property that belongs to all the members of a set and only to those members. So it's a universal and both, so it's both a universal and also a unique property. For that reason, the circle is completely black, referring to the idea that all the members of the set in this circle, the universal property, share the same property. And also there is a circle referring to the idea that there is a clear border between the inside and the outside. Here referring to the idea that the property belongs only to those members of the set. And for that reason, I call it a unique property. A lot of things that do have, in essence, a unique and universal property. Gold atoms, but also I believe a chair. I also believe that, for example, a cat has an essence. And maybe you believe that is interesting. Maybe you really think that is intriguing, challenging your philosophical mind. That's maybe not that very important. If it is important, it should also be relevant to discuss whether or not something does have an essence. And I believe it is relevant in a social or ethical sense. Right? Here we have two pictures that refer to apartheid, to racism or sexism. Right? So both practices, racism and sexism, are often a consequence, the result, intendedly or unintendedly, of an essentialist conception of the world. In what sense? Well, those sexists, racists, often have the worldview in which human beings are divided into groups: men, women, with a color, colored people with color, white people, etc. What is the idea? Well, there should be some kind of property that belongs to all human beings and only human beings. There should be a property that belongs to all men and only men, all women and only women, to all white people and only white people. So behind this unethical practices, sexism and racism, there is an idea, a more ideological worldview that supports the unethical practice. So if you want to discuss, criticize, and challenge these unethical practices, it could be relevant to criticize the underlying worldview. Yeah? I'm not saying that criticizing this worldview will be sufficient, of course not, but it could be relevant. My question is, well, is there in essence a universal and unique property that belongs to all things that we call violent and only the things that we call violent? In other words, does violence have an essence? And why should we know that? Why do you believe, or why do I believe that, in case we can answer that question positively or negatively, why should we ask this kind of and answer that question? What is the social and ethical relevance? Well, first of all, let me stress that I'm talking about violence, and that the concept or the word violence belongs to a wider web of concepts in which the concept of violence takes a specific place. So the other concepts are related to violence, but they're not the same. They do refer to something different. Danger, masochism, sadism, cruelty, evil, hostility, authority, power, aggression. Of course, we immediately feel that there is one way or another, there's similarities between those concepts, but they're not the same. And this is exactly the direction, or that already gives an idea of the problem that I have with the supposed essence of violence. Yeah? The fact that the term violence belongs to a wide web of other concepts already hints to the idea that there are no clear borders between all those concepts. Okay, let me explore the essence of violence. Well, you could, I mean, if you look at these pictures, for example, you see like violence in the private sphere, atomic bomb, the end of the Second World War, and here is a picture of a soccer player. Well, you could say then, well, maybe if you look at those pictures, and in a sense they are like the prototypes of violence, very good examples of violence, and nobody would disagree that this is an example of violence. Well, if you look at these examples of violence, and there is some agreement that these are all examples of violence, well, you could then conclude that the universal and unique property of violence is that it is physical first, and second, that it is a physical damage. Yeah. So all violence, that could be the essence of violence, is first damage. You cannot talk about violence if there is no damage. And second, there is also the physical property. So the essence of violence would be then that it is physical damage. Immediately we see that this is problematic. And we of course know that there is we can also have violent behavior at the social level or at the more mental level. Bullying could be an example of violent behavior that doesn't cause any physical damage, but maybe mental damage. Yeah? There are other examples too: humiliating, shouting, bullying, etc. What then would be the conclusion? Well, let's say that if violence is not necessarily bodily or physical or material, but also mental, you could leave those specifications away and only say that you could only say that then damage, and not physical or bodily or material or mental specifically, but damage is the essence of violence. Yeah. If you say that, and it could still be mental or physical or material or social or whatever, but still the essence of violence could be that it causes damage. First problem, it's very difficult to define what damage is. First, how will I give a definition of damage? What could it be to cause damage? When does something cause some damage? First problem. Second problem, not all things that we call violent cause damage. Take the following example. For one reason or another, you hate me, you really hate me. Suppose we are sitting in the room now, and there is some physical presence there. You sit there and I sit here, and you can't really see me. And for one reason or another, you have a very aggressive character, and you hit me. There's some physical contact, and a lot of people would say, and I hope they will say, that this is an example of violence. You knock on my face. Yeah? This is wrong. First, second, a lot of people would say this is violent, what you did. Yeah? you will say that no matter how much damage was caused by you knocking on my face. For example, it could be the case that you knock on my face, even though, for example, I don't have a bone here in my nose, or I'm a trained sporter, I'm a boxer. So I'm used to boxing, fighting, knocking, etc. So you knock on my face, you hit me, there is no physical damage. And even not at a mental level, I'm a trained boxer, so I don't really care if you knock on my face. Second example, there's a historical research, military research about military personnel shooting with guns. They figured out, the researchers figured out, that a high percentage of the bullets didn't hit the targets at all. The bullets were flying around in the air. And one of the best explanations of this situation is that the soldier is often very scared to kill someone else. It doesn't belong to our nature to kill a human being. And that's also the case for a soldier, especially during the Second and the First World War. Well, even though that a high percentage of the bullets didn't kill another soldier, didn't cause any damage, we would all say that this war violence is of that this war act is a violent act, even though it didn't hit the target. So unsuccessful attempts are still violent, even though there is no damage. So not all violence causes damage, and even if it would cause damage, it wouldn't be sufficient. Namely, or why? Well, a lot of things that cause damage aren't violent at all. If I take the train or I take my car, I can cause an accident, and there is damage, physical damage, material damage, even though there were no bad intentions, just an accident. So damage is not a universal property, and even not, of course not, a unique property of violence. Second attempt. First attempt, damage. Second was morally wrong. A lot of people would say that, or actually say that all violence is morally wrong. What do I believe? What do I mean? Well, there are a lot of things that we believe are morally correct. There are a lot of things that we believe are morally problematic, forbidden. It's correct. It's even a duty to help a human being. But it's wrong. It's forbidden to kill a human being. You transgress, in a sense, a moral law if you kill someone else. Or if there's some violence, you transgress the moral law. That would be the idea. And then you could say, well, morally wrong, maybe the fact of moral transgression is the essence of violence. Well, in a sense, there are some reasons to believe that it is true. A lot of violence causes some disgust. It's really disgusting seeing someone else who kills someone else, who knocks someone else on his face or her face, or whatever. Second reason to believe that morally wrong could be the essence of violence. There's an etymological reason that the word violence stems from violare, Latin, and the idea of violare in the old classical period referred to violating moral law. So we still have this idea in English, violating something. Violating could refer to transgressing moral law. Yeah? But again, is it correct? Well, of course it isn't correct. Morally wrong cannot be the essence of violence. Why? It is, of course, not a unique property. It's of course not unique. If it is true, it's under the condition. If it is true that all violence is morally wrong. It is not true that only violence is morally wrong. Cheating your boyfriend or girlfriend, morally wrong, even though it is not violent. But the question then is it a universal property? Does it belong to all the members of the set violence? Are all things that we call violent, are they morally wrong? But of course not. Of course not. Most violent acts are morally wrong, but some violent acts, even though it may cause some physical damage, can be justified. One of the examples is, of course, the war violence during the First World War, and the kind of war violence used at the end of the Second and also the First World War to free the Western European countries from the Nazis, from Germany, from 1845. We call this war violence, but we call this justified and not morally wrong. But if you would say that all war violence is morally wrong, then you have to say that the liberation by the Allies is war violence and also thus morally wrong. But of course, that's not the way we interpret this kind of violence. We say it's justified violence, not morally wrong. So you cannot say that every kind of violence is morally wrong. Or to put it in another way, the other way around, you could maybe say then that the acts by the Allies at the end of the Second and the First World War is morally correct. But if it is true that all violence is morally wrong, then you have to say, well, if it is morally correct, then it is not war violence. And that goes against our intuition, of course. And it goes completely against our intuition. Killing a terrorist, if he or she will kill like 500 people within 5 minutes, well, killing this terrorist is justified. Even though it is violent, it is justified. So not all violence is unjustified, not all violence is a transgression of the moral law. Second, a third candidate, all violence is intended. And in that sense, it differs from rain, for example. There is no intention behind the natural fact that it rains. There is no intention behind the fact that, here the second picture, that I'm falling on the ground and then that the coffee that's thrown on the ground, etc. A lot of pictures are taken intendedly, but if I have my cell phone in my pocket, I can take a picture without having the intention to take a picture. And it would be the case, that's what a lot of people argue, that a lot of violent acts express an intention to cause damage, physical, material damage, etc. And that is probably the case for a lot of examples of violence. But it's not necessarily the case. And since the 70s and 60s, we have this idea of structural violence. And we have this also, that's very relevant today, we also have the idea of structural racism. But since the 70s, a lot of mostly left-wing philosophers, thinkers, and one of them is Slavoj Žižek, who wrote a famous book on violence. It's also translated into Dutch if you are interested. He wrote he introduces a very famous expression of structural or systemic violence. And he refers with that notion to the undesired, unethical consequences that follow from the typical neoliberal capitalist society in which we live. Poverty is an example of a neoliberal capitalist society, and for that reason, the idea of structural violence refers to this kind of undesirable negative consequence of the system, capitalist society. It is true that a lot of people refer with the notion of structural violence to these effects, undesired effects, but of course these effects are not intended. They are an unintended negative consequence of the system. And so using the word violence does not necessarily refer to an intention. My conclusion would be that if you're searching for an essence of violence, you will be disappointed. There's no essence of violence. That's at least what I would argue for. All violence leads to damage, is morally wrong or is intended, does express an intention. So if you believe, here there's a picture of that causes a visual illusion. Yeah, you believe that there is something that links all these circles. And so you see the white thing in the middle, and you immediately have the idea that there is something that links the circles, and you behind this you have real complete black circles. But now, since there is something in the middle, you see something like a Pac-Man, like in the video game or whatever. And this is a visual illusion. Well, you could, I would say, there is also this conceptual illusion. We have the illusion, we have the idea, but this is an illusion. We have the idea that there is a property that links all the things that we refer to with the notion of, with the term of violence. But I believe that this is an illusion. There is nothing, or there is no universal, unique property that links all the things to which we refer with the term of violence. That's a conceptual illusion. Yeah, violence at that point is not exceptional. Here we have an idea. Here we have a picture of religion. I refer to the idea of religion, sports, but also, and that's a picture of a book that I wrote, Philosophy of Violence. We have pictures of three things: religion, sports, and violence. But ask yourself the question, is there an essence of religion? Is there an essence of sports? Is there an essence of violence? Or is there an essence of philosophy? Maybe you don't care at all about philosophy. You're right, of course. But maybe you do care about religion. Is there something that links all the things to which we refer with the word religion? Well, you could say, well, there's belief in a God. There is a belief in God. Of course, that's not true. That's not the essence of violence. There's some polytheistic systems in which we have beliefs in several gods. And you could say, well, then the essence of violence, the essence of religion could be that there is belief in at least one God. Of course, that's again not true. A lot of Eastern religions are characterized by the fact that there is exactly the opposite the case. Namely, there is no belief in God at all. So there is no universal property that belongs to all religions. You could maybe say that rituals or properties having a ritual is a property that belongs to all religions. If that's the case, then the problem has to do with the unique property. The fact that rituals belong to all religions could be an argument in favor of an essentialist conception of religion, but the problem is that not only religions are characterized by the fact that they have rituals. Politics and sports, we also have rituals. Also at university. Yeah? I guess that's my point. The same is the case for sports and philosophy. And I conclude with this slide. This was maybe, I don't know, abstract, concrete, interesting or not. And even if it isn't interesting, challenging, or abstract, is it relevant? Well, I believe it is. If there's no essence of violence, that implies that if you use the word violence, and if I use the word violence, and maybe someone else, a journalist, uses the word violence, If there is no essence, then it is not necessarily the case that we refer to the same thing when we use the term violence. So there could be a discussion among three people, or in a community, or in an organization, game communities, etc. There could be a discussion, and we all believe that we're talking about the same, because we have the illusion, and it's an illusion. We have the illusion that we all refer to the same thing when we use the same word, violence. There could be a confusion, because you believe you talk about the same thing when you use the word violence when I use the same word. We have different notions maybe about what violence is. So what is then the solution? Well, before you start talking about violence, right from the beginning, make clear what your conception, what your idea or your notion of violence is. And maybe your notion or conception of violence is different from what the other human being or your discussion partner understands as violence. You could have a very broad definition of violence. And you could say, my definition of violence is that it is aggressive behavior, whether or not it causes mental or material damage. Could be very broad. But you could also have a very small definition, saying that violence is, or the term violence refers, for example, to all acts intendedly causing physical damage. And it could be justified, but you should make it explicit. One reason why you have to know why the essence of violence doesn't really exist. Second reason is a more ethical reason. The first maybe is still too vague. Maybe there's an ethical reason. Think of the following situation, and then I'm finishing. Think of the following situation. Working in a hospital, psychiatry, for example, medical context. And there are two human beings, one doctor and another doctor. Both of them are observing the patient who is suffering from mentally, bodily illnesses. Yeah? Both of them are observing this patient. The patient is doing a lot of things that are unethical, undesired, knocking on another face, biting, cheating, lying, a lot of undesirable things at the social level, at the individual level, interpersonal level, etc. The first human being, the first doctor who is observing this patient has a very small notion of violence, meaning that if he writes, I hear something. It could mean that I have to stop, or that someone else has a question.
Yes, we're coming to the end time, Loda. If you want to finish up. Thank you.
I think I only need 1 minute anymore.
Perfect. Thank you.
Sorry. Where was I? Okay, so the first doctor observes the patient, and the doctor has a very small notion of violence, meaning that he understands as violence only those physical acts or acts causing physical damage. Since the patient is only causing undesirable problems at the social or interpersonal level, he wouldn't write, or she wouldn't write in his reports that the patient is causing damage. Second one has a very broad notion of violence, meaning that if he or she writes his or her report, he or she will use the word violence in his report of the observation of the patient. The director of the hospital receives those both reports. In the first one, there is no mentioning of the first one, doesn't mention the word violence, the second one does. If the director sees that, he or she will say, the first observation, there's no violence, so punishment is needed. The second one, oh yeah, there's a lot of violence, punishment is needed. And that would be unfair in the sense that we have a different treatment of exactly the same behavior, and that is unethical in the sense that it is unfair. Yeah. What is then the conclusion? Well, the director should be aware of the fact that human beings can have different notions of violence, and if you are aware of that, then you should be aware of the fact that the first one could observe exactly the same and write his or her report of the same observation based on a small notion of violence, whether the second one is on a broad notion of violence. You should be aware of that. Does it mean that, or what then is the more practical conclusion? Should be aware of that first, and also second, it could be ideal not to use the word violent when writing reports or whatever. It could be the ideal situation. It could be ideal not to use that, since there are different notions of violence. But is that realistic? Of course not. The word violence has deep roots in our brains and won't disappear if we decide in a specific moment not to use it anymore. But if you believe you have to use it in a report or something else, when a journalist or in an article, as a journalist in an article or whatever, if you believe you should use this word violence, please explain it. And not because of the confusion, but it could lead to unethical, unfair situations. And that, of course, is undesirable. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Loda, for giving us these insights into violence. Thank you for the audience out there who's tuning in. We're going to take a short break before we continue with a panel discussion. So please do stand by, grab a drink or something, and come back in about 5 minutes, and we'll see you then.
Okay, I think we're on.
Hello, everybody, and welcome. Welcome to our panelists and welcome to our audience. So my name is Sarah Markwich, and I am the international coordinator for HOEST Kortrijk, but my background is really in journalism and in the meeting of media and tech, and with a focus on immersive storytelling, and especially VR. So tonight, as you know, we're going to talk about sex and violence in gaming. We're going to talk about the role it plays in gaming, how it shapes the scene at digital arts and entertainment, the impact of sex and violence in gaming on user experience. We got a lot of questions about that. And the relationship between violence and gaming. Do they go hand in hand? We're also going to talk about the consequences and impact of sex and violence in gaming on many different levels. So let me introduce our panel. I'm going to start with the only female in the panel, Katarina Bruce. She's a games graphics production student at Digital Arts and Entertainment, DIE. And we're very happy to have her because in any discussions, any and all discussions like this, we definitely need panels that are not just male panels and white panels. So this is a small nod to some diversity. And in future panels, I hope we get even more females on them and people with every single background. So Katarina joined us because she's interested in the personal and moral issues involved in this discussion and the gray areas. She feels like there's a lot of gray areas, so she's looking for answers. We have two other students with us as well. They're both games graphics production students at DIE as well. We have Steven Saramak. Maybe you can wave, Steven. And you're really curious about the imbalance in terms of the consumer and the producer. So the different sides of the people who are dealing with the development of games and the user part of games. You also let us know that you're very open-minded when it comes to sexual topics. So we hope you'll add some great insights on those. And then we have Joao de Sager. Sorry if I'm ruining your name. That's a talent I have. And from what I understand, well, first of all, you're also a games graphics production student at DIE. And you really feel like we need more nuanced discussions about topics like sex and violence, that we see the blacks and whites sometimes of a discussion, but we don't get into the layers of it. You think that we can broaden our views, and we're going to try to do that tonight. And then we have Robin Rodet, who is a teacher at Digital Arts and Entertainment, and he teaches game history. He also does talks on many topics such as esports, games in education, the impact of games on modern society, and other topics. And you've already met our guest speaker for tonight, Lode Lauert. And you know he's a professor of philosophy at KU Leuven. As he mentioned briefly in his talk, he's done a lot of research on ethics, violence, technology, AI, and robotics. Uh, he's written papers about violence as an expression of energy and the various layers of violence. And he is quite an expert on the Marquis de Sade, the infamous sadist, the Marquis de Sade. And if you're not sure who he is, you can check out his character in Assassin's Creed, in some version of Assassin's Creed. So thank you again, panel, for being here. We received a lot of questions from different students, some from the students on the panel. And we're going to start with a first question from student Tom Pator. His question is pretty straightforward and one we've heard before. It's a common discussion, I think, and we're very curious. Maybe we'll start with Robin to answer it. So, why is it okay for films and cinema and movies to have so much sex and violence, but it's such a big discussion when it comes to video games? Robin, do you want to take this one on?
Yeah, I think it is indeed a little bit weird that we've had that in film. Well, film has been around for a lot longer, but that we've had that in film for a very long time. And of course, there has been some discussion about it. But now that it comes into games, we have a lot more uproar about the topic. Now, you do have to keep in mind that in general, when we consume film versus when we consume games, film is a lot more of a passive medium. So, in my opinion, I think what a lot of people have a bit of a mentality shift in, you put up a film, you put it on, and it just happens. There's no choice on your part. The only choice you have is watching or not watching. So the film happens. This is a story. It's been written by someone else. It's someone else making those decisions for you. Whereas when you're playing a game, it is supposed to feel like you are making every choice or you are actively doing something. And I think that's where the threshold for most people, that's where there's a bit of a line that gets crossed. And that's why a lot of people take a bit more issue with the matter when it's you actively, at least that's what you perceive, when it's you actively doing it.
Okay, thank you. Do any of the students in the panel have any thoughts on that topic?
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I also see it as that video games is a very interactive and also immersive medium that really draws you into the screen. You become the character, and thus you are the one that is maybe violent, that is using violent actions to progress into the game, or even maybe the game forces you to be violent in order to come further and to progress.
Okay, Loda, I come to you because if I think of the Marquis de Sade example, I know, for example, there are some serial killers who, in England, who were accused of reading Marquis de Sade and being influenced by it and going and committing a lot of murders because of it. So, a book you could say is like a film, and is it passive versus active involvement? Do you agree with where Robin is going with this, or do you have another thought about it?
But what was specifically is your question? So you before the question was why do we believe that consuming a violent game is more problematic than, or why do people often believe that consuming a violent game is different from a violent movie?
Yes, and you could also say in the past, reading books could lead to behavior, etc. I think this has been discussed on every medium, but yes, it's in this case film versus video game. Why is it worse in games than in movies? For the audience, for the
Yeah,
makers.
maybe not necessarily worse, but the reaction of the audience is worse when it comes to that.
And it's more controversial.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just that every time there's a new medium, it's discussed. I know with virtual reality too, it's the more active, interactive thing. So it's really controversial. So maybe in the next technology, then we won't be talking about games anymore in VR. But let's move on to the next question anyway. We have a question from another digital arts and entertainment student named Michalina Gasjenka Laskawi. She has actually several questions, so I'll take them in parts. The first one is, do you agree that sex in games is very immature and objectifies women? So, Katarina, I'm going to start with you in this case. I'm going to throw a lot of these types of questions your way as our female representative.
Well, personally, I do not know too many games that actually have the action of sex within them, because it doesn't necessarily happen all that often. However, when it happens, it is often with prostitutes or women who sell their bodies. For example, an obvious answer would be GTA 5, where you can easily go to a prostitute to pay them. And there would be a cutscene that you could watch. In The Witcher 3, for example, there's also, you can go to prostitutes. This necessarily doesn't influence the storytelling or the gameplay in any way. But it does, however, in some cases reward the player, which might be the problem here. Again, in a game called Call of War, you can go to prostitutes and then you will be rewarded with, I'm not exactly sure what it is, I never played it, with like a sort of energy boost or something. And that might categorize the action of sex as something to achieve, and then you get something out of it that's not necessarily related to the person that you are having sex with, and that is just basically that's just objectifying the action and therefore also the person. So up until now, yes, it has been problematic because there's no real representation of what sex should possibly be or could be.
Okay, and you actually brought us right into the second part of the question, which is, how do you feel about sex being used as a reward mechanism in games? So did somebody want to answer? I heard somebody speaking.
Yeah, I have a question. So, if it is true that video games are objectifying women, or and I also guess men, okay, maybe it's true, and if, under the condition that we agree what objectifying means, that I can see something, I have some intuition about it. Why? What would be the problem?
I think it's true. Just like you gave us an interesting look at what violence means, we would have to define all of these terms. I think the person who asked this question perhaps thinks that it does objectify women, and she's seen things that do objectify women.
Yeah.
So in her moral compass, it's objectification.
Yeah, okay, okay. Assume that it is. We all agree about what objectifying a man or woman in a video game means. Why is that a problem?
I don't know. Joao, why is that a problem to objectify women or men or
Well,
any
I think it's
Yeah, the assumption seems to be that if you objectify a woman or a man in the video game, you will also do that in reality, which is very controversial, I believe. Or if it is
I
the
think it
I
kind
think
of ties into the previous question, where because it's a more interactive medium, if you, for example, play an RPG like Mass Effect, where you romance a character and then as a reward at the end you get to have sex with that character, it sets a precedent, or it makes people think that that's how it goes in real life,
Yeah.
especially for people whose first interaction with those kinds of things might be through video games, right? Because they might be for 18 and up, but I'm sure most people don't really care about the age restriction on games. They play GTA 5 while they're 12 or something, so it's kind of hard to be aware of like who is playing these games and how are they being influenced by the precedent they set and how you interact with people, I guess.
I
But I
think
guess there is also empirical research about it, no? Is there? Is there someone who's aware of empirical research about people watching violent and objectifying games and objectifying behavior?
There's definitely research about it, and as research
And
goes,
in the context of violence, I know there's been research done where subjects were tasked to play a video game, a violent video game, and then they did tests on them to see how it impacted them, and they saw short-term impacts of playing games with violence in them. They were uh, more more violent. Not violent might be the wrong word, but they would get angry more easily, or they would be less forgiving or less compromising in the questions they answered. So there is short-term effects, but long-term, I don't think we really know yet, because games have only been around for 70 or 80 years, really, in their current form, not really longer than that, depending on what you define as a video game, I guess.
Yeah,
That's
but it's also sorry.
that's a bit of a stretch, 70 games, but yeah,
Yes.
70 years of games. But I think to sort of circle back a little bit on two of the things I've heard. One where we have games where it's as a sort of a reward that you get. It the thing about these issues is always it's the way that you interpret it, right? You can interpret it as a reward you're getting, or you can interpret it as a natural progression of a relationship. If this is a storytelling element where two characters start to develop a relationship, and in the end, or in the middle, or in the beginning, even there is sex involved, that doesn't necessarily need to be the reward, right? It can be just as easily, with just a simple mind shift, be interpreted as a natural progression of a relationship. Now, that's not me saying every relationship needs to have that and needs to progress like that. It's just another way of looking at that coin. Now, when we take a look at how it's done in games nowadays, to sort of summarize my feel on the topic, I do feel it's immature in games like Kratos, where it's really just an orgy of sex and reward, and it's very clear what you're getting because of what you're doing. When we take a look at a bit more of a modern video game like The Witcher, where the main character develops a relationship with several other characters, and throughout that relationship, sex happens, I think right there it's a lot more of a realistic interpretation of sex in a game than the Kratos example And in that case, I don't see why it should be an issue.
Okay, speaking about, you use the term realistic. I want to add a question to this. They say, whoever they are, some research says that pornography creates unrealistic expectations, let's say in males or in females, about how sex should be or how sex is. Is this an issue at all? Is it teaching people morally wrong or disgusting things? Sorry, Loda, I'm stealing some words I saw in your presentation. Anybody want to have a go at that? What about you? Yeah, Katarina.
Yeah.
Sorry, is this still within the context of video games, or is this just pornography?
Within video games. So, like pornography, does playing video games and having rewards for sex, having sex as a reward, does it create any unrealistic expectations or
Yeah.
ideas of sex in real life? Stephen?
Yes, of course, I could add something to that. So first of all, I think that pornography in general is like every other medium, just a certain type of entertainment, and you have to, if you want to enjoy it, you have to go into it with the mindset that everything is made up and nothing is real. And it is the exact same thing with any other film and video games. Everything is directed, everything is set up in a certain way that makes the audience, the player, whoever, feel certain emotions or see certain things. And I think, going back to that, what Robin said, I think that sex can be a very impactful stylistic device when it comes to storytelling and also showing off character traits, because sex can be so much more than just showing off a relationship. It can be a thing of showing off dominance, power and control, or just be plain sex to show, for example, if you are in a role playing game, for example, that your character that you're playing is just having sex without any strings attached to it at all. It's also a possible thing.
Okay.
And yeah.
I'm going to go into the next question, which follows up on this. We're going to run out of time very quickly, I'm afraid. But for the audience out there, you can also put your questions and answers in the chat box, and we'll come back to those after the panel discussion. So in the next question from Salome Vandreet, she goes on to ask if sex and violence in games can be used in good ways. So teaching ethics, teaching consent. So Stephen, you were describing different ways in which it can be depicted. But her main question is, where do we draw the line in sex and violence? And that's for developers, for users. How traumatizing is the word she used? Do we want it to be, especially for younger audiences? There are a lot of questions in there. And Stephen, I'm sticking with you because you yourself asked the question, like in an example of a AAA game, what is okay? What is not okay? How far should designers and developers go in terms of, protecting their own mental state? So Stephen, I'll let you go on, not too long because we're so short on time and these questions are so interesting. So
I try to make it short. I think when it comes to sex in video games, I'm honestly not really sure what to think about that, because I don't really see a point in having sex in video games, honestly. I think other media like books or film can convey that way better than video games can. But in terms of violence, where I would personally draw the line when it comes to violence, for me, is that if you go over the threshold of violent of depiction of what is violent in, I would say, the general average human history, like war or fighting, if you go beyond that threshold, I think, at least for me, it doesn't hold any teaching at all. It's just like there for entertainment, for showing off technology, for being sadistic or masochistic. And I would personally draw the line there. That wouldn't mean that I don't appreciate it, that it's there, but for me, it could be perfectly fine without it. So violence in general is a human thing as well as sex is, and it belongs in art. Yeah.
Okay. And Robin, as an instructor, I just wonder what you think for people who are working at companies and they're spending hours and hours and hours designing exploding heads and guts flying everywhere, and people's heads
Well,
being
if
chopped.
you can I interrupt and react to Steve? If okay, maybe you said it belongs to our human nature. Well, okay, I think it doesn't belong to human nature. It belongs to our human culture. First, and second, if it empirical research would show us that playing games that are extremely violent and that causes violent effects in the world, and then you have then you have a strong reason to prohibit it. But would you then say it's unproblematic, belongs to our human nature or culture, even though it causes a lot of violence? I'm not saying that empirical research has proven that, but under the condition that it proves, then you have a good reason to prohibit it. So I think to say
to sort of jump in on that, so we can continue with that. The longest running research on the matter has proven that it's not the case, that there's no direct correlation between violence in games and the violent behaviors of the people playing them. Now, of course, that's not empirical research. That's one long-running research, the longest running one, the most predominant one that has not proven that, but that these are the results that are coming forth out of that. So,
but I add to that as well?
Yes, go ahead.
So that is I also asked the question, but I think we are just like moving naturally into that. I think we are coming to this disbalance between the consumer who just consumes the violence and the producer, so the production team, the development team, the artist that generates, that produces the violence that we see on screen. For example, a hanging scene, you can do everything with motion capturing except the actual hanging, and there are artists that have to animate it, and we want the standard to be like as realistic as possible. And then you have artists that obviously need reference to make it look realistic, and they go to the dark web and find actual footage of hangings, real hangings, and they have to watch this like for 3 weeks or so to make an animation, for example. So I
Yeah,
think that
Steve, the thing about that is, and let me be very clear, that's my personal take on the matter, right? Is I don't like it when, whether it's the consumer or the producer, when anyone puts themselves into this sort of victim role. And the question sort of implies that, goes towards that direction, in the sense that if you're working on a production and you have to create things that you do not feel comfortable with creating, I mean, you're still the architect of your own destiny. You can stop at any time. And I understand that it's easier said than done, but if you don't want to do it, then just don't do it.
Okay.
yes,
I'm
exactly.
going to close it here. This is very interesting, and we're, believe it or not, we're already moving into the Q&A from the audience. So I'm waiting for questions from the audience. So audience, if you're out there, please do put your questions in the Q&A, and my colleagues will send them. In the meantime, I'll continue with the many more questions that we received from students. The next question is from Peter de Scherpemaker, and he asks if unethical games can be considered an outlet for those who struggle with vile or impure thoughts. What's considered vile and impure thoughts? So, can they help people and help people avoid committing heinous acts, for an example?
I don't know whether it can help or whether it helps, but what I can say is that this is a popular idea about sex and violence, that we have sports, religion, gaming, etc. That can be some outlet of those undesired things. There's not that much empirical evidence that shows and proves that sports and religion, and then for that reason I also take gaming, can act as outlets of undesirable things. So it's I really understand that people have the idea that sports is a canalization of aggression, but it's completely wrong, I believe. And it's the same for religion, and I believe that would be the same for gaming.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else have any thoughts on that before we
Yeah,
move on?
I think
Okay, Joel.
just like you said, kind of that it's not really going to be enough for those people that are actually looking for a way to channel their anger or frustration. Like you can say, "Oh, I've had a bad day at work. I'm going to go play some Call of Duty and shoot some people." But I think if you're really genuinely looking to hurt people, then that is not going to be enough ever. Like at some point, you will want to go do that for real if you are like that aggressive, that violent, let's say. But if you're just playing video games, and I don't think that's gonna like help you, at least not for long, from stopping you from doing those kind of things. Maybe
Yeah, I
stopping
think
is the wrong word, but
I
Katarina?
think the risk that it would enable the behavior to become worse is too big. I do not know any research on the subject, and I'm not a violent person, but I can imagine that it might actually, there's a 50-50 chance that it might even have the opposite effect, and that it might amplify the feelings that they already have, the violent feelings that they already have. So I wouldn't personally take the risk to use that as medicine against that kind of mentality.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes these things get brought together and there's absolutely no reason to compare the topics with one another. And I think this is one of those examples. If you're suffering from dark thoughts, violent thoughts, anything of the like, seek professional help. Don't put your eggs in the games basket. Don't put it in the film basket. I mean, go for a jog if it makes you feel better, but it doesn't necessarily, one doesn't necessarily need to correlate directly to the other. And
Yeah.
for me, this is one of those typical things. If you need to release some stress, go play some games. Well, sometimes that might help, but is it necessarily games? Is it the act of entertainment? Is it, I mean, going for a jog just makes you tired. Of course, you're less likely to want to go violently beat on someone when you're tired. But does it necessarily mean that jogging is good for anti-violent behavior? Not really.
Okay, I'm going to move on to the next question because we also got some questions from the Q&A. We're getting questions about creative freedom and freedom of speech. So in the industry and for developers, how far do we go in saying you can or cannot do this?
You go everywhere.
Are there limits?
All the way. There are, for me personally, there are no limits to what we can do with games or anything like that. And that's coming from the standpoint of looking at games like an art form. For me, there should be no limit to what art can show. There should be no limit to what art can criticize, etc. In general, everybody, for me, should have that option to just criticize as much as they want without, within certain boundaries of the normal human ethical behavior.
Okay. But let me interrupt. Somebody asked just now.
I'm 100% sure that, so they're in normal life.
Wait,
without...
Lode, 1 second. I just want to add one extra layer to this, following up Robin. Somebody asked about bestiality. Can we, is it totally okay to depict bestiality, violent bestiality, for example, in a game? Lode, if you want to answer, or Robin.
Yeah. When I react on what I don't see your name.
Robin.
Robin. Okay, sorry. So in normal life, outside gaming world, we have boundaries. You can say whatever you want. That you are smart, ugly, whatever, unsocial, but under the condition that you don't cause any mental or bodily damage. So I can say that you're completely ugly. You're ugly, stupid, no problem. But if it doesn't, under the condition that it doesn't cause damage, I'm not allowed to say very stupid things if they cause damage. Or I am not allowed to do things if they cause damage. Why would art or gaming be an exception for that rule? Well, so if you have art that doesn't express just an opinion, but compels you to be violent, why would that be allowed? I know that the tradition and the intuition is, it is be allowed, blah, blah, blah. But why? What would be the justification?
Well, because once again, I sort of feel that we shouldn't be sheep too much. We can all still make the distinction between what we can do and what we can't do. And if you can't make that distinction, then maybe you're not fit to be in society. But the thing...
No, but everything is allowed. And in normal life, outside gaming, not everything is allowed. And then you said, everything is allowed. But if there is a game or an art form that not only expresses ideas, but pushes people, human beings, to be violent, to be pornographic, to be objectifying, why would that be enough? Or would you still say that no problem? You can say whatever you want.
Yes, because once again, there is a difference. Like we're really separating the everything is allowed on the game side or on the art side, I'll call it, and not in real life, right? That's the kind of separation that we're trying to talk about here. Well, why would that be okay, right? Why do we have this duality in there? Well, I feel like I should be able to put anything on a screen, should be able to say anything to you. It is still up to you to act on those things, and vice versa. And that's a personal feeling, right? I still feel that in society we're being blocked too much. In general,
I would like to add something to what Robin said. In general, I completely agree what you said, but I think that, and I don't know if that sounds like a little bit too harsh right now, coming especially from me, people who know me. I don't know, but I think that there are some boundaries that we have to even lay on art itself, because we have to keep in mind that it always creates some sort of platform and people are going to see whatever we put out there. And for example, if we give people the platform, the ability to have a platform to share certain ideologies, for example, the Nazi ideology, I don't think if that is something that we in general can allow to have.
Okay, but hold
And
on.
Stephen, in one of your questions, you also mentioned that sometimes designers have to go into the dark web to find footage of things that they can't find otherwise to be able to design it, which can be traumatizing in itself. Is that going too far in this case? Robin, you can go ahead and answer. I'm going a little bit off track
Yeah,
now.
it's not necessarily an answer, but Lode said, of course, with very strong conviction. Can you
Yeah, so
sort
I
of say
really
why?
have this. Well, we live in a society, liberal society, let's say, and I completely disagree with the idea that art, and let's gaming be closely related to art, is some exception in the world. So, as a human being, as a philosopher, as a gamer, I'm not allowed to say everything I want, and you have to be aware. You can be punished for that, and we have good reasons for that. You cannot say to me that you are not allowed to take a part of the exam because you are a white human being or you are a black human being. You're not allowed to say that. Why would be an art or gaming an exception to this general accepted idea? So that is often with artists and with artists and maybe also with game people. They suffer from some exceptionalism. They believe that there's exceptional rules for art. Why would that be the case?
I
Why would
think
that be the case? I'm not allowed to say everything or to do everything. And gaming is not something that is outside the world, it's part of the world. And if a gamer develops a game that really pushes human beings to be violent and objectifying, I really think that is problematic. And that's something different as saying that everybody has a freedom to speech. It's not about freedom to speech, it's about pushing human beings to do something, causing damage, for example.
Well, I would say, can I?
yeah, sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I would say that in general, video games are the perfect medium for people to try out certain things, to be someone that they are not. And you can't just like go around in the real world and like shoot at people or rape someone who's next you can do that, but it will have consequences. Whereas in the gaming world, you can just experience in a sort of abstract, stylized way how to feel without boundaries.
Okay, let me
Yeah,
ask you. Let me ask you. I'm sorry, I'm going to just go to a couple of other questions that fit in with this. Somebody in the audience asks how he can convince his mother that it's not because he's, playing violent games that he's going to go out and shoot people on the street, and how can we change this idea that a lot of people have who maybe aren't necessarily involved in gaming but looking from the outside in, because this is definitely a thing. How can we change the people's views on this and make it more positive?
I
Anybody?
think
maybe gaming.
Sorry.
Katarina, sorry.
Well, I feel this is slightly related to a topic that we had a few discussions before, and I think one of us gave up the scientific. Yeah, it was Robin, about how it's not necessarily correlated with each other. That playing violent video games makes you violent. Up until now, it hasn't really been proven that those two really are correlated. And if you really want to convince your mother, I think science is a good way to do that because it's usually unbiased.
I'm a bit more harsh on that standpoint. Let's say hypothetically, not in case of the person asking the question, but you have a strict parent or a parent who has these concerns, and you want to try to convince them. It's if you're playing those games and you go out and commit violent acts, I think there's something wrong with you, not with the game. I think it might be your upbringing, it might be your personality, it can be a whole number of factors. And if your parent feels that banning you from violent games because then you're going to do violence is a good thing, I think for me, there's more wrong with that parent than with that child. Maybe you fucked up your kid when you were raising them. Because if playing...
Wait. Isn't okay, I understand what you're saying, but isn't this how the gaming world is somehow projected and maybe even promoted into the outside world? Or why is it so misunderstood? I do understand the concerns of parents. I'm a parent myself. And why do parents or whomever have these ideas? Like, where does this come from?
Well,
I mean, that you
these sorts
answer
of
that, but like, it's a problem, and it's a real thing that people get it wrong.
these sorts of ideas in combination with media, with entertainment, I'm just going to call it entertainment in general,
Yeah,
have existed
agree.
throughout history at any point. Rock and roll dancing incites lewd and promiscuous behavior that was absolutely scandalous and unacceptable. Certain books are banned because the words arranged on a page were not okay with some people. I mean, it's always going to be the case that you have people who do not understand the medium they're dealing with or who fear the influence such a medium may have. And throughout
Okay, let me ask you another question that comes from Stephen, actually, and also some people in our audience allude to this as well. Is explicit violence necessary? Why wouldn't a subtle hint do the job as well, the suggestion of it? Why does it have to be so in your face? Why does that make it appealing? Storytelling also is about giving hints and suggestions. Why does it have to be so bloody, over the top? Maybe... Okay, Robin, yeah.
I can make it very brief. It doesn't need to be. Sometimes it is completely unnecessary. It's not always the case. Sometimes it's nice, beautiful butterfly particles. Sometimes it's over-the-top gore. And does it need to be? No. Does it bring a certain atmosphere? Yes. Yeah. Is it taught in school? No, not necessarily.
Is it pushed by companies?
It also has a bit to do with, I guess, with the nature of violence. I mean, I think it's very difficult to be suggestive about violence, whereas for sex, it's explicitly the opposite. This could be very attractive to be suggestive about sexuality, whereas it is very difficult to say something suggestive in an attractive way about violence.
Could you really? I think, for example, I can just make something up. For me, it kind of always drops into the horror genre, that if you don't know exactly what is haunting you or something like that, it makes it the whole emotion even stronger, because you don't see it visually, but it plays in your head and you make up everything. So, for example, subtly hinting at violence, if there is a mad character having like a saw blade, and you are, I don't know, on some sort of table and you can't move, and then he comes with the saw blade and you hear the sound, you see the saw blade, and right before the actual violent act happens, you don't see it. Somewhat happens, the camera turns black, whatever, but you hear the sound and everything, and the whole scene starts playing in your head. I think what Robin said, it has to do a little bit with the atmosphere that the development team wants to create. But sometimes I believe it can have a stronger effect to just let the scene play in the audience's head than just on the screen.
Okay. Speaking about the audience, I have a question. Loda, maybe I'll direct this at you at first. So someone asked if aren't we trying to shift the responsibility for whether or not having sex and violence in games is okay towards society? Well, it is a very personal decision where to draw the line for yourself. So it's personal. It's each person decides if they engage in games. Each artist decides maybe how far they'll go with games, and if their boss wants more from them, hopefully they can leave the job, and etc. Where does the moral decision making and individual responsibility come into it?
I think it's not about only individual responsibility, and not only about collective responsibility. Both of them are important. I think we have a collective responsibility, let's say a more political responsibility to make clear what is desirable, what is undesirable, and what may be done and what may not be done. That's more at the collective level. But even though some things are allowed to be developed, as a designer or as a human being, as an individual, you still need to be, or you still need to make a decision. You still need to find your own reasons why you do or you do this or do that.
Okay.
Even though at the collective level, so it's not only about individual or collective; it's about both.
Okay, Lode.
So I think.
Okay, Robin. Yeah.
To go in on that, so let's say, well, not let's say, you can't kill someone in real life, right? Well, you can't, but you can't. You shouldn't be. You're not allowed to, right? That's a rule we made, or most societies made, that you can't do that. But it's okay to do that in games, right? We can do that in a game. There are plenty of games where that happens. In your opinion, should that not be allowed? In those games? Should that type of games be completely shut off? No more killing in any games?
Of course not.
Of course not. So
of course not.
At what point is there a difference between games and artful mediums and the rules we made in reality? Because that's the point I was trying to make. For me, those games and those art pieces, they don't have any rules. In real life, yes, we do have those rules. We need those rules. I'm not against them. But on a piece of paper,
I think you make a mistake. So you make a mistake that art and game are something different, something outside society. And on the one side, in society we have rules, and in art and gaming we don't have rules. Everything is allowed. Well, I believe expressions of art and sex, etc., are allowed. There are exceptions. As an artist, you cannot tell your people with some piece of art and maybe also with a gaming, with some gaming, go and go outside the world, go to a shop and kill a lot of people. You're not allowed to do that, in my opinion.
But
you are allowed to express.
You're blaming either a piece of paper or a message on a screen or a depiction or something like that for the actions of an individual. And I don't agree with that. The person decides. The person has the action of doing something, and it's that person that should stop themselves.
That's true. That's two things. I'm not blaming the piece of paper. I'm blaming the author of the piece of paper. Second thing, it's not because you follow what someone else asks you to do that you are, as an author or as the one who does it, it's not about the. No, sorry. Let me start again. If you follow what an author or an artist asks you to do, then you are responsible for that. Yeah. So if an artist asks me to kill someone else, I am responsible for that. But does it mean that the artist isn't responsible at all? No, of course not. It's not about the one or the other. Both can be responsible.
That's
and let me say this: if an author asks a human being to kill another human being, he can be punished and he will be punished, and we have good reasons for that. And it's not about my opinion, my feeling. You are not allowed to do that, and we have absolute expression of opinions, but not about pushing someone else to kill someone else.
If I may,
we are not, and that's the same for an artist, for a gamer, for a president, for you as a human being, or a professor or whatever.
Katarina, you wanted to say something?
You said that arts and games are a thing that Robin might perceive as something being outside of the rules of society. I think just quickly thinking, I might put it more in the context that it is in society itself. So society has this template of rules that everybody follows, that you can't kill, you can't do bad things, you don't rape. And within that are things like art and games and stuff like that, where those rules don't really apply, but the people who follow those rules make those games. So that template of rules is in their mindset, and we half trust them to follow them to a certain extent. So they do have the freedom in those games to push those rules, but nobody will really ever expect them to go so far beyond that it's just so insane, and then people will react and people will get angry and people will not accept that. I do believe that if a game would come out where the game says, okay, I want you to go to the store, I want you to buy a gun and see the first black person you see, people will not accept that game and people will get angry.
Okay, I agree, but Robin was saying that that would be allowed. I agree that, and I hope that nobody will follow that, but he said that it would be allowed. I totally disagree. And I
Hold,
think
hold
that
on.
government.
That what would be allowed? Because I think we misunderstood each other then.
You said that it would be allowed that if an artist or a game player, game developer pushes the player to kill something or someone, that would be allowed. No problem. Everything is allowed. That's what.
Yeah, but that's where I do think we understand and misunderstand each other at the same time. What you understand as pushes, I think and I feel should be an impossibility, right? I can say whatever I want. You should be able to stop yourself from killing someone.
Yeah, that's something else.
That's something else. But that's what I mean when I'm doing this. Whatever I put in my game, whatever I put in my art, whatever I put on a piece of paper, nothing about that should give you the right or should give you the self-righteousness of doing that then. And that's a fault on you, not a fault on me.
Okay.
Well,
when you do it.
We are almost
So
coming
to
the end.
As you as an artist,
Wait.
ask the players and all the listeners to kill someone else, you cannot say, oh, that's just a game. It's just a game. I didn't do anything. You cannot say that.
That's where we disagree. But I know the law. But that's where we disagree as opinion.
We're going to agree to disagree now because we're over time, which is no problem. We're going to go until 9:45. Thank you to those of you who have stuck around this long. Sorry for going over time. We won't even have enough time to cover half of the wonderful questions we're getting in the little time left. I have a quick question because I see more questions about promotion, and we also got a question from students about marketing and strategy. So I had the experience when I was in the States. I went with the Digital Arts and Entertainment flyer, which at that point showed a woman with very, very big breasts, a very large butt, a very tight, I don't know, whatever she was wearing. And I gave it to a friend who runs an international school, a middle school, saying, oh, can you advertise this for your students? And I was in America, and she said, I absolutely cannot put this out. I could be fired for putting this out. Our students would stand up and march against it. It confirms every stereotype out there about gaming, and it's offensive. And I was like, whoa, I haven't lived in America for a long time. I'm not used to this. I just wonder what you think of that, because that again brings us to how the outside world sees it and maybe how the inside gamer world sees it and the depiction. So Joao, I don't know if you have an opinion about this, but I'd love to hear you.
I mean, when I saw that specific artwork before joining a school, I was like, this seems kind of old. Doesn't seem like the kind of modern depiction of any kind of character I would see nowadays. So I didn't really think much of it. Of course, also because I'm male, it's kind of like I don't mind. But I do understand how that can give a very bad impression, or bad first impression at least. Even if afterwards you see many other great artworks from our school, or just from gaming, for example. Seeing that first impression can be very important, even if there's so much more to the medium or to that school, for example. And I think in video games.
Sorry, go on. I do have
yeah, I think in video games, that's kind of the issue where most people's first impression, and that's also their only impression, is Call of Duty or Battlefield, what have you. And that's like the tip of the iceberg of gaming. Like, yes, it's kind of senseless violence and whatever, or kind of cookie cutter games, but there's more to that. And I think that's kind of a similar issue where if that's what you're advertising mostly and go to the games that are the most popular, then yeah, that's what most people will see first, I guess.
Okay, so you say the artwork was old-fashioned. I understand that, but obviously it was thought out. And would such artwork like attract male students to apply for digital arts and entertainment? Catalina, would it attract female students to like look up to that ideal or something? Sorry.
When I saw that character, and when I still see that character, I really, really don't like it. It's a quality made character, and there's a lot of craft in it, but I feel like it really does not represent what our school does. and it does really feel like just thirst baiting. So yeah, I think maybe it was not the intention, maybe it was subconsciously done, but I really do feel like that is to attract certain people.
So
Okay, this
no,
is no
I can
insult to West. It's just
I can
this is fun.
No,
I can give a
don't.
bit of clarification on that topic. So the artwork in question, which of course a lot of people who don't know what we're talking about, let's make it very clear. It's not a nude woman on top of a. She's fully clothed with quite a sizable amount of cleavage showing. Yeah, that's what we're talking about. A very pushed, stylized female bombshell kind of pin-up kind of figure. And this was made by a student that I know personally as a side project. It's an interpretation of a comic book in France that has great popularity there. And it's the main character of that comic book. That's what that person made. It's a great example of texture work, of sculpting, of modeling, of all the technical aspects. It looks good. And I'm not talking about the female shape. I'm just talking technically what's on there. But I understand why some people would choose to interpret that in a certain way. And I understand why it rubs some people the wrong way. On the other hand, all of those things, for me personally, are in the eye of the beholder. Yeah, everybody can take offense with anything. The two images I have behind me, I mean, one is an unrealistic depiction of a male hero character that makes me feel very insecure about both my jawline and the way I should gaze out at the world. The other one, a little bit more difficult to compare myself with, but we can. This is one of those topics. You can push it to the limit. You can interpret it in any way that you want. I'm not defending it. I'm not saying we should do that in the future. We should put nude people, non-nude people on there. It's just, you're never going to please everyone.
Of course, but it does come to this interesting topic, I think, because it keeps coming back in different ways, of outward perception of people who maybe aren't familiar with the reality of games and, of the users who are using them. But anyway, we are coming to the end. We have 2 more minutes. So I actually just want to give everybody a last word. You can, wind up however you want, but we just have to do this in 2 minutes. So Loda, I'm going to start with you. If you have any concluding comments you want to give. I wish we had more time. I think we could go on for hours. So,
if you want to prohibit something, you have to have very good reasons.
Okay.
Very good reasons, but very good reasons. That would be my point. And a second point would be that I'm against what I call exceptionalism. There are no positions outside society. So an artist, a soccer player, or a game player, or a game developer, or a philosopher isn't an exception and should take follow the same rules. And if we would like to discuss the law, we can do that in a platform. But we cannot teach our children to not follow the rule, to discuss the rule. They have to.
I have to stop you there, but thank you. That's a good summary of some of the things we've talked about. Robin, you're next. I'm going to let this end with the students.
Yeah.
So, 30 seconds.
Now I feel like I have to come up with something very deep and
you can just say thank you for tuning in.
I mean, for me, it's going to be thank you. Thank everyone to send in those questions and to have a talk about this.
Okay, good answer. Stephen, I bring it to you.
Yes, I also want to say thank you to everyone who is joining us for this awesome ride. I really enjoyed it. And in a very artistic kind of way, I want to close with a quote by Alaska Thunderfuck, who is a drag queen. And it's quite related to art, because if you see something you don't like, something unseemly or offensive, something vile or disgusting, we'll be happy to take your complaints after the show at the corner of FU and go fyourselfavenue.com. I see you there. Bring a sweater.
Okay. I wish we ended on that, but I'm going to now go to Joao.
Well, I also want to just thank people who are watching and the people who sent in their questions. I think this is the start of a very interesting concept of kind of opening up discussion about very sensitive or interesting topics. For example, here, I think we saw that there was a lot of discussion. We kind of ran out of time to cover everything. And that kind of shows that it's still something that people want to talk about. It's not really figured out yet, or ever will be, probably. I think this is quite fun and very interesting.
Okay, thanks. And Katarina, our female panelist, I started with you. I will end with you.
I can hardly not say thank you now as well, since everyone has done it. So thank you for watching, and especially, if I have so many notes. I would love to talk about this way, way longer. So if you ever feel like talking about this to me or to anyone, the only way, ethics is a very complicated subject and there's no real answer to anything. So it's very important that you keep talking about it whenever you feel like you have something to talk about. So please do, and have a good night.
Okay, so thank you everybody, to our panelists. Thank you, Loda, for coming to us from KU Leuven. Thank you, students. Thank you, Robin. And thank you to our viewers, to all the people who put questions in. I'm sorry we didn't get to all of your questions. We will certainly look at them and consider them. Robin can read through all of them and take them into discussions in his classes, and we will certainly be inspired for topics for our future Game for Thought sessions. So a big virtual round of applause for everybody involved in this. Thank you, Digital Arts and Entertainment. Thank you, Ho-West. And
is there an ethics of gaming in Kortrijk?
Ethics of gaming in the Digital Arts and Entertainment? It's coming. It's on its way, I think. Right, Robin?
Well, I've one game ethics class because I'm not always allowed to teach ethics, but I don't teach ethics. We discuss it.
It's coming. It's for the future.
Can confirm.
So something to look forward to, and something obviously very worthwhile from how little we could cover tonight. And something we learned is there's just never enough time to get to the bottom of things. So we hope we provoke some thoughts and some discussion. And again, good night. Thank you, everybody. And keep thinking about games. That's what Game for Thought is all about. Bye-bye.
Bye.
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 Good night, everyone.
Thank you.